Thank you very much for that introduction to the topic, this first topic. I'm Dr. Brooks Robinson, founder and co-contributor to blackeconomics.org, which is an internet portal that features vigorous analyses of Black economic concepts, issues, policies, and plans. To the Most Honorable Salas Muhammad, Queen Muhammad, President Dr. Mukarram, who just brought me on, Pastor Brady, who delivered an excellent introduction, Dr. Broner, the producer of this summit, and even to Bevan, our engineer. And I should not forget to also recognize all of the distinguished panelists for this Afrodescendant Nation Self-Determination Summit. It's obviously a great pleasure and honor to be here, and I'm excited to have been invited to participate. I'll try to be as brief as I can be on this topic. Now, let's start by saying, in the field of scientific inquiry, probably the most important question is why. Accordingly, before we turn to the question that has been posed, how self-determination should appear to us, we should possibly ensure that everyone is clear on why we should seek self-determination. Therefore, for this segment of the summit, I'll highlight 9 key reasons why it is imperative that Afro-descendants, that is Black Americans, become self-determined. Afterwards, I'll touch briefly on the question, how self-determination should appear to us. The following 9 key selected critical circumstances, they're reasons why Afro-descendants should be motivated to seek self-determination. We'll start off by looking at number 1. Afro-descendant median household income for 2021 was just 69% of the nation's household income. Number 2, Afro-descendants' mean household wealth in 2019 was 7 times smaller than the mean wealth of white households. Number 3, 19.5%, almost 20% of Afro-descendants lived in poverty in 2021, while only about 12% of Americans live in poverty. Right now, in 2022, only 45.3% of Afro-descendant households, of U.S. households, are homeowners. In 2021, only 26.1% of Afro-descendants above the age of 25 held college degrees, while almost 40%, actually 39% of U.S. residents over 25 years of age held college degrees. Number 6, on the 2019 4th, 8th, 12th grade reading and mathematics standard assessments, academic assessments that are conducted by the U.S. Department of Education, Afro-descendant youth performed the poorest of all 8 racial and ethnic groups that were tested. This is not a new finding. It is a perennial outcome. This is something we should be disturbed about. Number 7, Afro-descendants comprised 33.6% of those imprisoned in the nation's jails and in prisons, federal and state prisons and local jails in 2020, 33.6%. Yet we only comprise about 12% of the population. Very importantly, about 96% of the about 3 million Afro-descendant business enterprises are of the sole proprietor variety. Only about 135,000 of those 3 million enterprises are large enough to have employees on the payroll. And related to that, of those 3 million businesses, they earn receipts of about $206 billion back in the 2018-2019 year period, which is less than 15% of the 1.4 or $1.5 trillion spending power that we had at that time. Now, finally, this is number 9. We should be aware that as a result of the research performed to develop vaccines for COVID-19, scientists have developed the capability of producing individualized vaccines on demand. These vaccines on demand are consistent with individuals' genetic and biological profiles. We believe that this new technology, this new capability will facilitate the designing and manufacture of diseases to order. These diseases will kill the unwanted and leave the wanted alone. Now to the question, what will self-determination look like? Well, we've thought about that, and we've written about it in a book that we prepared a couple of years ago called Exodus, a book for Black Americans showing a way out and up. But we don't have time to discuss all of those ideas here. But what we want to emphasize is that all of the points that we have made, all of the foregoing points, should make it clear to Afro-descendants, to Black Americans, that we have many reasons to want to be self-determined. All we have to do is to develop the will. And we know that if there's a will, there's a way, and we can find the way. I'll stop here and listen as other panelists express and convey their visions of what Afro-descendants should have as determination, as self-determination in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Next, we'll have Dr. Ray speak on the same topic. What does self-determination look like to you for descendants of enslaved Africans?
Thank you. It's really good to be here, and thanks for the invitation. And it's good to see members of the Afrodescendant Nation. We've had a lot of work done in the past, and hopefully we'll do some more in the future. I guess as a scholar, well, my name is Ray Winbush, director of the Institute for Urban Research at Morgan State University and HBCU in Baltimore, Maryland. When I think of separation, and that's the only word that I can think of with regards to self-determination, self-determination can only occur when there is political separation, either by eliminating or moving away from alien forces in the Black community. That's the only way you can talk about it. And historically, there's been two brands of that, if you please. The first is international, and we see this mostly in the movement by the Honorable Marcus Garvey in the early 1920s and so forth, that he called for a mass exodus of us, you know, leaving this country, returning to Africa. You know, I'm seeing some of this right now when you look at more African people in America and the Caribbean are returning to Africa, as well as the African nations themselves having things like the years of return that we recently saw in Ghana and Nigeria. The other type of separation that we've seen historically has been internally within the United States. Examples of that would include going back with Edwin McCabe in 1890 when he told Black folk, as well as Ida B. Wells telling Black folk to move to Oklahoma so that they could be self-determining in how they ran their government, schools, and so forth. We see it in the Republic of New Africa during the 1970s and 80s. And one that is not that known, in 1934, Oscar Brown Sr., who was the father of entertainer Oscar Brown Jr., he organized a group called the National Movement for the Establishment of the 49th State. And he actually asked the government and tried to organize the government and Black folk around the country to give us a state. So you see domestic as well as international movements towards self-determination. I think, I can't, again, conceive of, self-determination without removing ourselves from this country. And I doubt very seriously, this government is going to allow Black folk to have a 51st state that would be all Black where people could go. So I think that we really have to talk seriously about relocating our people the way Garvey did in the 1920s and wanted to do, which has not occurred, but we have to seriously think about doing it. I'll stop there and we'll have more discussion later. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Ray. Next, we will hear from our monarch on the same topic, Queen Mashaki Muhammad.
And they did it on their side.
Good morning, everyone. I have been introduced to you as Queen Mashaki Muhammad, but I also want you to know that I'm known in my legal community as Harriet Abubakar. I have practiced in the states of Georgia and California. I'm past president of the Georgia Association of Black Women Attorneys and past president of the Georgia Association of African American Attorneys, and of course, a graduate of the UCLA School of Law, having received my doctorate degree in 1980. I want you to know a little bit about me so that now and in the future, you will understand some of the things that I have gone through to get to this position in life now. I came from a small town background in Watsika, Illinois. I know most of you haven't heard of it. It's a small white town, and I grew up as a child in that environment. And then I moved to Chicago, Illinois, where I was teased because I had such a white accent. But during those times, I got exposure to both worlds, and it has benefited me. I feel comfortable in the white environment, and I feel comfortable in my Black environment. Now, why did we move on to the international scene? It's because of an incident that took place in New York many years ago when Malcolm X was live and active then and a part of the Nation of Islam. Something happened on the docks, and the boats that were from Egypt were not allowed to dock and unload their whatever that they were having that day. I don't remember. But they reached out to Malcolm X, and he reached out to the community to find out what was going on. We found out that some of the Jewish community was involved in it. It had something to do with the dispute. Malcolm went to our people on the streets, got to talking. They put in a boycott that was very successful in Harlem. And soon, miraculously, the dock blockage was undone, and they were allowed to unload their equipment, their packages, everything. So from that, there became an arrangement that was made by Malcolm X with Gamal Abdel Nasser. He was president of what then was called the Jumhuriyat al-Arabiyyat al-Muttahida, United Arab Republic. This ended up in becoming an arrangement between Nasser and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. They selected my then first husband, Akbar Muhammad, who was Elijah Muhammad's baby, and I to go over to Cairo and live there and become cultural attachés between the two unions. And this proved to be very, very fruitful. And it gave me the chance to learn the Arabic culture, learn the Arabic language. And from then I was in an international mood. One day, right around 1992, I believe it was, is when self-determination as an identity became an issue for me. My husband, my current husband, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, called me in and discussed the possibilities of us now approaching the international arena and letting it be known what our future intentions are as a people. This was something new to me. I knew nothing about the United Nations, and I really had to start from scratch. And some of the nooks and crannies I had to experience had funny stories behind them, but because time is limited, I won't get into that. But my husband and I spent 17 years traveling to the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland. And we were trying to get ourselves established and known as a people that fit on this world stage. I was traveling with my current husband, Silas Muhammad. And we learned a lot of things. During those first few years, we went under the auspices of a church there in Geneva that was giving us training in how to lobby in the United Nations. And at that time, I had no badge. I was not of NGO status. We weren't quite sure what we needed to do. So I did whatever was necessary. I found out that in order to give an intervention there, you had to come in under the auspices of a known and recognized NGO, which stands for non-governmental organizations. And we did find out that it was possible to do that. The guards at the UN weren't really all of that cautious about who was coming in. So if you could act like you belonged, they'd let you in. One day I was a Chinese gentleman who had given me his pass. And that just tickled the heck out of me that I could walk past them and go in there and give an intervention as a Chinese man. But we learned a lot of things in those years. And we learned that I was put under the guidance of a Dutch attorney. And he would take me around to people, introduce me, and let them know why we were there in the UN. And I want to share this history with you because a lot of our people and the world do not know that that happened in that time and in that manner. So this is my chance to share with you what we did when we first went to the UN. The UN organized a training session for us. They called it UNPO, Unrecognized Nations and Peoples Organization. And it lasted about a week. And we met in The Hague, the Netherlands. And what they did during that time was to teach us what we could do if we were interested in becoming a nation. That's what this whole entire week was devoted to, helping unrecognized nations and people become states or nations. And one state that came out of that whole session was the state of Georgia, not the one here in the United States, but the one over in Europe. They came out of that meeting that we had, and we learned a lot of things. So to us, and what we need to do as part of our topic, to what we look like, we have established, with the help of the United Nations, an identity for ourselves. And we're going to get more into that during this session today. And we're going to let you know some of the things that can be done, because they pointed out to us during that week that you don't have to have all of your services in place. You could become like the Principality of Liechtenstein. That's something they used as an example for us. And Liechtenstein makes contract with neighbors nearby for major services. That's how they got started out. So something for our professionals to consider is the fact that if we don't have all of the things that a nation should have to get launched, we could do something like that also. That's something that's available. So we will continue what it is that we can do as we go on with today's program. Thank you.
Thank you, Queen Mashaki. Next, we will have Brother Shaka Barak speak on the topic, what does self-determination look like to you for descendants of enslaved Africans? And please provide a brief introduction of yourself first.
First, giving praise to the creator of the universe, to the Honorable Silas Muhammad and his wife, Queen Mashaki Muhammad, and the members of the Lost and Found Nation of Islam, and followers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Messenger of Allah, Master Fard Muhammad. I say Assalamu alaikum. I'm also so very thankful to the High God for giving to us the Jamaican-born Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who gave to us the first and largest mass movement in the United States, the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League. I'm honored to be invited to participate in the Afrodescendant Nation Self-Determination Summit 2022 alongside of these distinguished panelists. My name is Shaka Barak, a member of the UNIA, and have held many local, regional, and international offices. I'm also the president of the Marcus Garvey Institute, a research organization on the life and the works of the Honorable Marcus Garvey. I also have met Dr. Y.N. Clyde and went to the United Nations on several occasions with the International Human Rights Association of American Minorities. Today, because of my interest in the movie Woman King, I have regular conversations with the United Nations ambassador from the Republic of Benin. What does self-determination look like to me for the descendants of enslaved Africans? To me, the discussion begins thousands of years ago when Africans gave to the world the first civilizations, when we gave art, science, literature, mathematics, and to the world. To me, I must acknowledge the great empires of Ghana, Mali, Songhai, and the kingdoms of Dahomey, Yoruba, Ashanti, Zulu, Hausa, where African women were a major partner in building, maintaining, and expanding our civilizations, whether in war or in peace. I'm also reminded that in 1513, the Portuguese began the transatlantic slave trade and how hundreds of thousands of us landed upon the shores of the Americas. The horrors of this damnable institution of slavery carried out on the southern plantations and the sugar, rice, cotton, tobacco plantations throughout North, South, and Central America was the most barbaric practices ever employed by people calling themselves human beings. I am once again reminded of how our men and women have resisted. I remember the many petitions and complaints of our people for justice against taxation without representation, but also remember how we fought and died for freedom through the many revolts and insurrections. Because I remember, I am thankful to the Toussaint L. Overtures who gave us the Haitian Revolution. I am thankful to Paul Coffey who sought to set up a separate government in West Africa. And I'm thankful for the insurrectionists like Gabriel Prosser and Reverend Nat Turner. I remember how the Baptist and Methodist churches had a hand not only in serving as places of worship, of schools and places of refuge, but they had hands in the insurrections. In 1865, when slavery was abolished, it was followed by 90 years of Jim Crow and Jane Crow-ism. And thousands of lynchings, poor schools, poor housing, unemployment. And let me share how the Honorable Marcus Garvey called together our people from around the world at the first International Convention in 1920, when 25,000 came on opening day. A plebiscite was achieved, and after 31 days of this convention, a Declaration of Rights was created with 12 complaints and 54 human rights demands. I remember how the messenger, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, was also a member of the UNIA and then gave us another movement, the Nation of Islam. And today, both of the movements are still alive. I conclude by saying that our self-determination must be based on knowing ourselves and our history. It means knowing our rights and fighting like Black Panthers under David Walker's appeal and answering Malcolm X's call by any means necessary and agreeing that we will unite our communities until we can create our villages of peace like that which was set up in Dimona, Israel, and that we pursue our economic, political, and educational ends across religious lines and under Black nationalism. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Shaka. The legacy continues. for the Hebrew Israelite nation. Our condolences to Prince Aziel's family. And we have his son, young Prince, with us here today. Young Prince, if you would honor us and answer the question by introducing yourself briefly, and answer the question, what does self-determination look like to you for descendants of enslaved Africans?
Absolutely. I'm so honored and privileged to be here this morning amongst this august body. First, invoking the name of God, all of his prophets and all of their ancestors who have given their life for God. I'm eternally grateful for. I want to thank personally the great leader and teacher that is amongst us, the Honorable Silas Muhammad, his wife, Queen Ashaka, and all of the Livestream Nation of Islam, and all of those who are the Afrodescendant Nation, and everyone that is in this beautiful audience and participating in this beautiful conversation. I greet you in the words of peace. Shalom alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. You are absolutely correct. We are mourning the loss of our late great Prince, my personal father, Prince Asiel, but we do so not in sadness, but we do so with peace of mind. And I say that as I introduce myself, because my father lived a full life that was dedicated and predicated on the word of God and the liberation of God's people, the Afro-descendant nation. He trained me, as he did so many others, to follow in his footsteps so that we could continue to liberate our people in the name of God, so that no stone is left unturned. When you say, what does self-determination mean to me? And I will be brief. Even though I am young in age, relatively speaking, because of the experiences of my father and those who he has blessed me to study up under and the knowledge that he has imbued me with, I am very old in spirit. And as our great brother has just articulated the teachings of the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey and all of those great African civilizations that preceded us up into the very day, we don't have an excuse, nor do we have a lack of information or examples that we can follow in this day and time that allows us to be free and have the propensities to enact self-determination. But more so, we're doing it today, this very panel, with all of those who have their expertise, their experience, their knowledge in the realm of self-determination. The answer is, how do we bring it all together collectively so that we all have our part to play in the life source that is self-determination for Afro-descendant nation? Self-determination is implementation. I think that's the very key. It's not that we don't know what to do. It is doing it long enough so that we see the advantageous benefits and that we're able to bring into fruition the result and the desired product. You're absolutely correct. Not only am I a son of my father, Prince Asiel, who was a part and is a part eternally and perpetually of the Hebrew Israelite community, who left America in 1967, first going through the jungles and the bush of Liberia in 1967 and being there for 2.5 years before reaching the promised land, which is not a land of Europeans, but a land of Afro-descendants, and reclaiming our birthright and establishing our own sovereign nation, which was built out of necessity. We were not allowed to participate in their schools. We were not allowed to have the appropriate and proper health care, nor were we allowed to even find minimal jobs that allow us to sustain ourselves. So everything that we had to do was on two fronts. Internally, we would develop the necessary institutions that will allow us to serve and protect ourselves. So we created our own schools. We created our own farms. We created and built our own homes out of an abandoned community that was left from former nuclear reactor workers. We built our own birthing centers, our own sewing centers, and on and on and on. But to finance that, we had to have an external component, which would bring in the resources. So we had to develop relationships with other sovereign nations. And that was my father's particular responsibility. Not only through America and the diaspora of the Caribbean and South and Central America, he went through the internal or the interior of the continent, reaching all of those who were amenable to Black people having the ability to self-determine their own future. And so we were able to bring the necessary resources in, whether it be support financially, whether it be access to raw materials, or whether it just be other sovereigns backing us as a sovereign ourselves. See, the part that we have to play supersedes whatever our own personal opinion is relative to self-determination. It is seeing the value in each and every one of us and what we bring to the table and allowing that to sustain us. That is the key, and that's how I see self-determination being brought into fruition, because I myself am a product of two worlds. My mother was a Muslim follower of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and a student of him. And so my very life is the combination of the two. So I was blessed to not just see from the Hebraic perspective self-determination, but from one of the greatest examples known to man through the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and what he was able to do in America, created a nation unto itself. So we have all of the answers. Now we just have to do the work. And I believe that's what we're doing now. That's what we've been doing. If I look at the Honorable Silas Muhammad and the Lost Foundation and the beautiful idea to even grow the concept of a nation of Islam to the Afrodescendant Nation, where it's all encompassing, that we're able to morph from 40 to 50 million to 400 plus million. What a beautiful thing. The sacrifice that him and the Queen did by going overseas and studying the necessary law that required us to be a free nation. I mean, again, we have all that we need at our hands and at our feet. Now it's time to do the work, and it's imperative that my generation understands the sacrifice that was made for me to be here so that we can continue this work and we don't fall asleep or get lulled to sleep by the adversaries who want us to be perpetual slaves. Self-determination is unification. Self-determination is implementation. And that's what I see in this day and time. I thank you so very much for giving me this opportunity to speak.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Prince Yusuf. Next, we will have Salih Muhammad speak on the topic, what does self-determination look like to you for descendants of enslaved Africans? And briefly introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Dr. Akila Bukaram, and I want to thank, send greetings to the Honorable Salis Muhammad and Queen Mashaki Muhammad. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm honored to be able to speak on this panel. My name is Salih Muhammad, co-founder of AYAN Global, an acronym for Afrodescendant Youth Network Global, Righteous Intelligence in the Fight for Human Rights and Self-Determinations for Afro-Descendants, and I'm from Washington, D.C. My vision of self-determination would be the unification of Afro-descendants within the global diaspora for the purpose of autonomous external self-government. According to esteemed law professor Hurst Hanum, self-determination has two aspects, internal and external. Internal self-determination is the right of the people of a state to govern themselves without outside interference. External self-determination is the right of people to determine their own political status and to be free of alien domination, including formation of their own independent state. There were two critical points in history where the United States government had a valuable opportunity to allow the so-called freedmen, now known as African Americans or Afro-descendants, the opportunity to manifest their internal self-determination. Malcolm X once said, "Revolution is based on land. Land is the basis of all independence. Land is the basis of freedom, justice, and equality." The first time the freedmen or African Americans were presented with the opportunity to partake in internal self-determination was when Special Field Order Number 15 was issued. It was a wartime order proclaimed by Union General William T. Sherman on January 16, 1865. As we all know, after the assassination of President Lincoln, President Andrew Johnson confiscated the lands from the freedmen and issued them back to the former Confederate slave owners. The second time, the freedmen or African Americans were presented with an opportunity to partake in internal self-determination was during the establishment of the Freedmen Savings Bank, a bank established for the newly emancipated slaves. The bank was eventually embezzled of about $3.7 million from roughly 70,000 ex-slaves, which is roughly about $1.3 billion today by its appointed white administrators. Based on these two instances alone, I do not trust in our ability to practice internal self-determination here in America without interference. Thomas Jefferson once said, "Every man and every body of men on earth possesses the right to self-government," and I believe it should be external. Thank you.
Thank you, Salia. Next, we will have Ida Hakeem speak on the topic, what does self-determination look like to you for descendants of enslaved Africans? And briefly introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. It's an honor to be here with you, and I appreciate the opportunity. My name is Ida Hakeem. How did I get the name Hakeem? In 1983, my martial arts instructor, Khalid Hakeem, handed me the book, The Fall of America, by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. I'm a person very familiar with the Bible, and I've been seeking the truth for a long time. My thought was, this could be true. Khalid and I moved to the south side of Chicago. It was a culture shock. I had a lot to learn. I wrote to Mr. Muhammad, Mr. Silas Muhammad, asking him, what can I do? He answered, reparations. I remember the moment that I read his words. My first thought was, white people are going to kill me for this. I wrote a book entitled I Bear Witness, and I went to work studying reparations. I met Queen Mother Dorothy Lewis, and I learned from N'Cobra. In 1992, Mr. Muhammad asked me to organize and create a UN consultative NGO. I took the only path I could see and organized white people into Caucasians United for Reparations and Emancipation Cure. We got together and wrote the book, Reparations, the Cure for America's Race Problem. And we produced a second book, The Debtors, Whites Respond to the Call for Black Reparations. We also produced magazines. We met together. We did TV and radio shows. We assisted attorney Deidre Farmer-Pahlman in her lawsuit. We attended rallies, and in 1997, we achieved NGO consultative status. We had 120 members at that time. After that, we facilitated the participation of Black leaders at the UN 3 or 4 times a year for 9 years. And I'll talk more about what was achieved in the next section. I also would like to talk about what I'm hoping for and what I would like to do to help in bringing about a better world. What does self-determination look like to me? It looks like an absolute necessity. You must step away from the white world and develop your own world based upon your moral core. You have the wisdom of the ages, and we need you. The world needs you. I don't have the qualifications to create that world with you. It's for you to do. My desire is to assist you in finding the way to unite as a human family. I believe that's a must in order to attain your freedom and recognition as a people. Thank you for listening. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Ida. Next, we will have Brother Let speak on the topic of what does self-determination look like to you for descendants of enslaved Africans? And please briefly introduce yourself.
Thank you, my sister, and thank you to the family for inviting me to be on this panel today. My name is Willard Leck. I am the male co-chair of the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. Founders of this organization had the insight back in the early 80s to create a leadership structure that has both a male and a female co-chair. So I bring you greetings from the female co-chair, Sister Kenneth Henry. And again, thank you for the opportunity to address this question on behalf of NCOBRA of what does self-determination look like for descendants of enslaved Africans. The National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America is a mass-based coalition organized for the sole purpose of obtaining reparations for African descendants in the United States. The National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, or NCOBRA, was formed as a coalition in the mid-1980s to bring together the different groups working for reparations for African chattel enslavement at the time. A key organizing force was Baba Imari Obadeli, our ancestor, and also the organization, the Republic of New Africa, and which is also known as the RNA. And the RNA was founded on the principle that people of African descent were not given a choice. They weren't given a choice regarding their initial kidnapping and enslavement, and they were not given a choice regarding their fate after the end of the internal political conflict we call the American Civil War. Now, the RNA chose to establish a separate nation in the Black Belt states of the US, but recognized that there were other options. Physical separation from Europeans while remaining in this country is one option. There's also repatriation. Repatriation, traveling to a different country, whether on the African continent or in the Caribbean, is another option. And then finally, integration into American society is a third option. So we have separation, repatriation, or integration. And as we look at the history of African people, we see that there have been leaders, there have been movements that have championed in all three of those strategies at different times. Now, NCOBRA thinks self-determination for the descendants of enslaved Africans looks like a plebiscite. A plebiscite is a gathering of a group to decide for themselves what they do, where they go, and what their future will be. A plebiscite is what has historically been denied to Africans enslaved in the US. A plebiscite would provide descendants of enslaved Africans the opportunity to choose their fate, to decide for themselves, to self-determine their own fate. A plebiscite requires education, engagement, and action on the parts of the descendants of enslaved Africans in order to not just make a choice, but to make an informed choice. And we've heard from the previous speakers parts, and of all these both strategies as far as which way to go, but also we've heard folk talk about the different elements of the kinds of education or the kinds of engagement or even the kinds of action ultimately that will be required collectively for both a plebiscite and or for legitimate self-determination. Because self-determination cannot exist without our determining our fate ourselves. And that requires a plebiscite. What a plebiscite will look like has to be determined by us. The outcome of a plebiscite may result in different people taking different actions, different approaches, different journeys either separation, repatriation, or integration. Self-determination is our making the determination ourselves. And part of the plebiscite process, again, is that it doesn't have to be, one thing about European culture is it only allows, you can only be one thing. It only allows for one thing. But really, the reality that we live in and our experience is that we're many things. We're multi-faceted, have many multi-dimensions to our experience. And so a plebiscite would allow for more than one choice. It doesn't have to be majority rule. We got this particular option got the most votes. That's the only thing that we can do.